Good morning. I warmly welcome you to the second edition of Deftronics, Deftronics 2015. We all live in a globalized world. Nevertheless, no country can afford to ignore the importance of self-sustenance, self-reliance in this world. And I think that is the primary principle behind Make in India. Global partnerships combine the strength of global manufacturing, economies of scale, and modern technology with a good intimate understanding of the local environment through the local companies. And I think this partnership lays a good foundation for both the multinational partner as well as the Indian companies to thrive on the growing defense market in India. As per the official estimate of Ministry of Defense that I could find on the internet, the country is likely to spend nearly $130 billion over the next 7 to 8 years on defense modernization. Now that would make India one of the largest defense markets in the next 8 to 10 years in the world. 2015-16 of the total budget allocation and outlay for the defense sector, for the armed forces in particular, nearly $10 billion is allocated for electronics related procurement. Again, that's a very large amount, most of which unfortunately is likely to be imported unless there are interventions planned in the short term. The sheer size, $10 billion of electronics procurement, offers an excellent opportunity for extensive involvement by local companies. Many of them may have to partner with global companies, of course. Some others can do it on their own. And this should not just make us self-reliant, but in the longer term, establish India as a major player for defense exports also. Now, since the launch of Make in India in September 2014, in fact, August, by the Prime Minister, the Union budget, I noticed, has made quite a few provisions for incentivizing manufacturing sector. Budget has proposed, of course, to reduce the corporate tax, to make manufacturing in India competitive with other manufacturing countries in the world over a 4-year period, as I understand. Reducing for smaller companies royalty, income tax on the royalty and technical services fee they receive from the multinational companies down to 10% now, and simplify the regulatory mechanisms to improve the ease of doing business in India. So I think a significant amount of work is being done by the government. Something that I want to link with defense electronics is also the initiative of DAITY. For electronic system design and manufacturing, DAITY has launched in 2012 and now the revised version in July 2015 called the Modified Special Incentive Package, which for electronic manufacturing offers 25% capex reimbursement for any electronic manufacturing activity in certain segments. Now, while that scheme is not specific to defense, but there are various categories in the package where defense electronics industry can also benefit from. There is, of course, in addition to the capex reimbursement, there is a reimbursement on excise duty on the capital equipment, as well as in certain cases, 10% production subsidy based on the net value generated from the production turnover. And this incentive that's offered is valid for 10 years from the date of commencement of manufacturing in the country. So it's a long-term commitment from the government to provide incentives for manufacturing sector in this country. Of course, electronic manufacturing clusters, some of you may have heard who are linked to the electronic industry. There are incentives from the government for promoters of electronic manufacturing clusters to establish a cluster as a world-class logistics provider, bare infrastructure, and also common facilities like the test facilities. So these are initiatives that we notice are significant from the government side. In terms of foreign direct investments, we noticed that the FDI in defense and defense electronics, of course, has increased from 26% to 49%. And of course, there are exceptions for investments above 49%, subject to the Cabinet Committee on Security analyzing and assessing the investment. Further, startups, we all see that there's a tremendous amount of venture capital industry that's thriving in this country on startups. So portfolio investors, be it venture capitalists or even high net worth individuals, can take up to 26, I think 24% stake in any joint venture in India that are of small size. So you see there is openness among the government to attract investments, not just from foreign direct investments, but also in participation in equity, which is necessary for thriving startup system in this country. No electronics today is sans software, and software is playing a very significant role. I see for the Indian information and communication technology industry, which is very mature over the last 30 years, to develop some indigenous innovations, whether it's related to intelligence or surveillance. I think the military generates terabytes of data, whether it comes from high resolution optics or communication sensing or sensors, and that data has to be processed. You need tremendous computing power, tremendous algorithmic activity. And I think that's where the software companies in India can play a pivotal role in innovating indigenously in this segment. Data analytics is other area for operational planning of any large sector, including the military. I think data analytics plays an important role, and there are plenty of companies in India that specialize in data analytics. I think this is another area where Indian companies can very actively participate in defense electronics. Some challenges that I would like to list down where I think the industry as well as the government need to further pay attention. The defense electronics manufacturing and R&D plan. While I noticed that the military has a 15-year long-term integrated perspective plan that's developed internally, there is also a 5-year services capital acquisition plan. In addition, there's a 2-year rolling annual acquisition plan. So this gives whoever the stakeholders are a perspective of 15 years, long-term R&D, to 2 years, which is a rolling asset acquisition plan. To what extent is the private industry involved in this planning and the information is made visible? There appears to be definitely an area for improvement. So perhaps a channel that has to be opened towards the private sector, if private sector participation has to be enhanced. So that, because many of the R&D, let's say in defense, is not short term, it's not engineering in nature. Sometimes it takes investments of 5 to 10 years. As long as it's made visible to the private industry and commitments are provided, I'm very confident that the private industry will work very closely with agencies like the DRDO in developing indigenous technology. So I think this is one area where I sincerely request that some of these plans are made visible and the private sector is involved in planning for the military. Human resource development is one more dimension, I think, where we need significant improvement. The graduates and the postgraduates emerging from many engineering colleges in India are, I would say, thoroughly underprepared. Mr. K.D. Naik, Dr. K.D. Naik has to acknowledge it, of course, because he has the first-hand experience, are underprepared, not because they're not capable, but the technologies required for defense electronics and software are slightly different. Providing specialized and relevant postgraduate and doctoral programs are a must. I have noticed that some of in the area of aerospace and other strategic areas for the country, agencies like the ISRO have developed their own postgraduate programs to develop talent relevant for them. I think this has to be also important for the wider military applications and defense technology. The Honorable Prime Minister in Bangalore in February this year for the Aero India show, he said, we need a vast pool of highly skilled and qualified human resources for the defense industry. Our aerospace industry alone would need about 200,000 people in another 10 years. We will set up special universities and skill development centers to cater to defense industry just as we have done in atomic energy and space. So there's a clear will and commitment as stated by the Prime Minister, and I'm very confident that we will take this forward and realize. One other area that I think the government needs to focus on is the trust deficit. Mr. Manohar Parrikar made that mention recently. There somehow appears to be a trust deficit when it comes to large defense contracts, access to the private industry in India. it's predominantly the trust is in large global companies. Now, what does it take to build that trust? I cannot provide a recipe. Probably we will present that a little later. But it should be possible for the Indian private sector to participate in large, complex defense manufacturing contracts. The smaller scale prototype orders that are now taken by many companies are absolutely inadequate to develop self-sufficiency in building competence in defense electronics. I would not like to mention about offset requirements in a lot of detail, but that is also an issue that needs to be tackled. We as IESA and with our partner association NASSCOM, with whom we signed an MOU, have committed to build a robust defense industry in India. India's first defense electronic policy is on the anvil now, seeking to streamline procurement and boost local manufacturing. The two associations, along with our knowledge partner, Roland Berger, have provided recommendations to this policy for mid-term, short-term, intermediate and long-term mechanisms to boost indigenous production. You will get a snapshot of some of those recommendations in a few tens of minutes to come. And also localizing integrators and suppliers along with. At this momentous event, along with MMI, we have nearly 350 companies from 25 countries participating. We also have 5 pavilions. I invite all of you to engage in various debates and play an active role in influencing the shape and future of defense electronics industry in India. Thank you very much, and I extend a warm welcome to all of you and the dignitaries on the stage.